this week, or heard it just this week, about this church. This evangelist was preaching at this church, and when he got there, he said he was shocked when the pastor called for the ushers to come take up the offering. Everybody stood at their feet, and they were shouting and clapping their hands and praising the Lord. And the evangelist, he was shocked. He said, "What in the world's going on here?" And the pastor said, "Well, the Bible tells us that we're to rejoice or be happy and taking up the offering." He said, "I just got my people believing that's what they're supposed to do." he said, "I've never been to the church since like that, but that'd be a good thing, wouldn't it?" Okay, let's take our Bibles and turn to the 40th chapter of the book of Genesis. We're marching right on through Genesis now. I'm going to try to cover a chapter a week, but we're going to back up just a little bit into chapter 39, verse 21. I want you to look at this again with me. It says, "But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." Now, can you just imagine, put yourself in Joseph's shoes or any sandals back at this time, and here they are. They let him out of that comfortable home that he had finally worked himself up in, out of Potiphar's house, and now they're taking him down to the prison house. And it says the Lord was with Joseph. I'm glad that's there, because we're going to read it a couple times tonight. And it says, "And the keepers of the prison, or the keeper of the prison, committed to Joseph his hand all the prisoners." I want to mark that. All the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. Now, he wasn't just over the two that we're going to be talking about tonight, the baker and the okay, and but he's going to be over all of them. And it says that because the Lord was with him. And there we find that phrase again, the Lord was with him. And that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. I have titled this message tonight, or this lesson, we're going to call it, "A Victim of Doing Right." A victim of doing right. That's Joseph. He's a victim for what? You go back and tell me, as we looked at his life thus far, what has Joseph done to deserve what he's going through? It doesn't sound right, but this is the way it was. There were those that say, or there are those that say or feel like they have been victimized. You might be here tonight feeling that way. And if you are, I want to address this to you. I want to talk to you tonight. Maybe they have, or maybe they are having, I can even put it that way, some situation in their life where they have felt like they've been a victim. We can look around our world tonight, we can see it all over. We see some children that may feel that their parents have been too strict on them, and they feel victimized, when all in all their mom and dad have just been doing their children like they should be doing them, training them, bringing them up in the way that they should go. But the children don't take it that way, and we're hearing that and seeing that a lot. Even in schools today, teachers are having a terrible time trying to discipline children. I've been watching it across this country, and we're finding that more and more the children are trying to lead the teachers rather than the teachers teach the children. Some might feel victimized at work when all in all the ones that they're working for they're just being asked. They're asking their employees to do that which is required. Now, I go back in my days at the mill. I worked 15 or 19 and a half years at Detroit Steel. And I seen what the union done down there. I seen men that came in to the and just sit for 8 hours and do absolutely nothing and drew their pay. I can tell you story after story. One man, he had a business on the outside. He worked straight midnight turn, and he had, believe it or not, and I'm not making this up, I've seen it, he had a mattress upstairs in where he was working, and it was a bed. And he made it every morning when he left the mill and climbed in it every night when he come back, and they paid him. Now, his argument was, they know where I'm at. If they need me, they can come and wake me up and I'll go do the job. And then he'd go out in the daytime and work in his private business that he had. And we wonder why there's not a steel mill down there. I've seen times when a light bulb would go out and shut down, the set of lights would go out and shut down a whole department because there wasn't an electrician there to change the light bulbs. Now, I'm not making this up. I've seen it. I've seen men who knew how to just hit their machine just right with their hip and shut the thing down and call electrician while all of us would sit around waiting for them to get that thing fixed. And even those of us that didn't want to be doing this was even drawn in, be a part of it. And who's the victim there? It's the business. But now who's the victim? We don't have a steel mill here, and this has happened all across this country. I seen a time, no, I take that back. My dad seen the time. When he first started working in the steel mill, they told him if he didn't do such and such and worked him like a dog, and they said, if you don't want the job, there's 10 men out there that do want it, and we'll get rid of you and bring them one of them in. And they would cause him to do things that, but then we got the union come in and the thing turned over. Well, I didn't mean to get off on that. But we know that there are those today that are truly victims. Victims of unfair and unjust treatment. We live in a world today where we read or we see, maybe with our own eyes, those who really are suffering abuse. And this is sad. I've even found it in churches where people in the church have been abused. Husbands who are mistreating their wives. I've seen it right here in this church years ago. I seen a pastor that we had in this church that I knew personally, even worked with him at the steel mill, who had a wife. I think they had 9 children, and the only time she got out of the house was to go have another baby. He treated her like dirt. He bought all the groceries, he bought all the clothes, and she wasn't even allowed. We didn't see her very much. But he was that kind that had that kind of power over his wife. I feel she was abused. And I've seen it myself personally. And I know that the reversal of that is also true, where there's wives who have taken advantage of their husbands. And you know who really suffers through all of this is the children. You say, where are you at on this? Well, stay with me. We're going to look at Joseph in just a moment. But I know that there are those who have been going on. I mean, this has been going on for years, but it seems like today, it seems to have escalated. Wives abandoning their husbands and their children. And fathers doing the same. You got the statistics today and find out, especially in the black community, of the black children that don't know where their daddies are because their daddies have abandoned them. I know of a man, I don't want to tell how close, a black man who I know of the girls, several of them, that he fathered children by, and you never seen him. The children never seen him, and I think he had 5 different women. And when I worked at the mill, I was seeing some of this. But I know that that's even escalated. And it's not just the blacks. I want to make that known. There's wives who have abandoned their children and their husbands and children by, and I got to watch how I say this, to go out and get an education, and the husband's worked hard to put her through school, and as soon as she gets her education, then she leaves her husband. And I've seen and heard about the same thing happening in the other way, who have women who have put their husbands through college, and then when the husband gets his degree and gets his thing going for him, then his wife, he feels bigger and better than her, and he walks off from her. We see this going on. Well, I bring it out just because I want to show what mistreatment can do. And we find it right before us with Joseph. It came to pass, verse 40, or chapter 40, and verse 1. After these things, that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Now, we don't know what they done, but they done something bad enough that the king had them put in prison. Now, if anyone could claim mistreatment, I think that we would, as we look at Joseph has been done wrong all the way since we picked up on him. Some would say that maybe he made his mistakes back home, but he didn't deserve the treatment that his brothers gave to him. As a matter of fact, they wanted to put him to death. They wanted him to die. Now, here he is in a strange land, a slave, and a situation where there's no one to help him. He probably had struggles with the language, totally at the mercy, and actually he was really the property of strangers. He was a slave. After dealing with learning the new language and earning a favor of his master Potiphar, and being seduced by his Potiphar's wife and lied upon, now here he is finding himself in prison, doing what? Doing right. Just being right. He hasn't done anything to deserve what he's going through. And Joseph, you see, he's gone from the pit to Potiphar's house and now to the prison. And it has been a rough 10 years, to say the least. He was 17 years old when he was let off, and we know that he's probably around 27, 28 years at this time. And we don't know how long these two that were this butler and the baker was in prison. As we read about it here, it could have been months, it could have been just weeks or days. But Joseph has been put over them. And we ask this question, and sometimes this question comes out of our own mouth. Where is God in all of this? We're going to answer that question before we get through here tonight. We can see him at times when things are going well, and maybe even when questionable things comes into our life, we can see God. But where is he when things go wrong and everything is so unfair? Now, as he is being led off to prison for minding himself and doing the right thing, we want to scream out with him, God, where are you in all of this? Where are you, God? Where? Well, we are not left to question that, because I just read before we got to this chapter where God is. Go back with me to verse 21 again, and we read, but the Lord was with Joseph. And we come down to verse 23, because the Lord was with Joseph. Where is God? He's right there with Joseph. Maybe we can't see, and I'm sure Joseph didn't see at this particular time, but there he is. He's with Joseph. And as Joseph looked back on his life, I wonder, do you think maybe that he may have remembered the dreams? I'm sure that he did, but did he apply those dreams to what he's going through right now? Remember the dreams he had concerning his brothers, that they were going to bow down to him, and his mom and dad were going to bow down to him? That's probably running over and over and over in his mind, and he's thinking about the dreams that he has. And he's now in prison, and he's given a new position in these first 4 verses. No doubt, the high rank that he had back in Potiphar's house has probably gave him a boost to get the job that he's got now. But here he is over the entire prison under the captain there, and that may have been Potiphar himself, because I believe it's indicated that he was the number 1 man in Pharaoh's court. And I believe he probably put Joseph where he keep his eye on him. And maybe, just maybe, he's the one that elevated Joseph to that position when he put him there. Because I just personally don't believe that Potiphar believed his wife. He could have had Joseph put to death, but he didn't. Now, we got a good question here. It's for sure that God is working in the background. Now, I want to give you a verse of Scripture. You all know it, or you should know it. Romans 8:28, which says, for all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are the called according to his purpose. Now let me say that again. It says for all things, not some things, not most things, but all things. Does that mean that prison is good here? We know the end of the story, don't we? And yes, it is good. You may be going through something right now in your own life. You wonder, why, God, am I going through this? Well, let me tell you something. You haven't seen the end yet. And some of us may not see it down here. We may have to see it over there. But I want to tell you what. God is not going to be indebted to any of us. We can't do so much good for God that it's going to be beyond what he's done for us. Let me just put it that way. Now, even in prison, Joseph is excelling. We can see this. For he put over all these prisoners, and among the prisoners were 2 very distinguished fellows. Let me just read it. It says in verse 2, and Pharaoh was wroth against 2 of his officers, against the chief of the butlers, and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. Now again, we don't know how long they were there, but let me just mention these 2 fellows. They were the chief butler and the chief baker. That means that they were over the ones that served the king. Now, what was a cupbearer? The cupbearer was the one that would taste the food, taste the wine before the king ever took his drink. And if, just if, there was poison in the cup, so long, cupbearer, goodbye, he's history. And long live the king. That's why he's there, to make sure that the king didn't die. Now we read over in the book of Nehemiah, that Nehemiah, that was his position under King Artaxerxes. And it was a high position. This man was right next to the king. And the baker, of course, he was responsible for all the food that was fixed for the king. So these two men were high in rank in the kingdom there. The other man, the baker, another person on whom the king had to put his trust, and why they're in prison, we're not told. We can use our imagination and maybe think something like this. Well, did someone try to kill the king? And these two men were in question, and so the king had them put in prison. And there they are with Joseph. Two things we read in verse 4 that stands out. I want you to see this. It says, and the captain of the guard charged Joseph with both of them, and he served them. Joseph was put over both of these men by the captain of the guard. And number two, how long they were there, we don't know. I've already brought out. But Joseph, he got close to them. And there's a purpose for that. God is making all arrangements. You know, we serve a sovereign God, don't we? He's in charge of all things. And if we don't understand that, we better get to understanding, because it's a truth that we need to know and believe. I don't care what happens in my life. God is in control. I may not like it. I may not understand it. I may have questions that I want to ask God. And I'll get to some of these before I get done here tonight. Joseph again he's confronted with dreams. Now, he's already had two dreams of his own, but now he's going to be confronted with dreams again. Let me just stop right here. How many of you dream? Let me put it that way. Okay, I see just about every hand go up. How many of you have nightmares? I see hands going up there too. What'd you eat before you went to bed? Huh? Have you had dreams that have scared you to death? You know, some of my nightmares that really get to me is I'm scared to death of heights anyway. I mean, I can get up on top of this roof as long as I'm back from the edge. I get to the edge and I get antsy. And I find myself sometimes floating, flying off the edge of something. And I wake up with a cold sweat. I've had dreams. For the most part, I can't remember the dreams that I dream. I dream probably just about every night. A lot of nights I'll get out of bed, go in, sit down in my chair just to get rid of the dreams that I'm dreaming. I wake up and I couldn't tell you 5 minutes after I'm awake what the dream was, but I know I didn't like it. Joseph, this was different here. These men remembered their dreams. Joseph remembered his. And verses 5 through 8, notice, and they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of the dream. The butler, the baker, the kings of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning, and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. Whatever they dreamed, it made them sad. And notice Joseph comes in, and what does he see, and what does he say? He sees their sadness. If anybody in that prison had a right to be sad, it should have been Joseph. But here's two men, they're sad because they've had a dream that they didn't understand. And Joseph, he said unto them, and they said unto him, verse 8, we have dreamed a dream, and there's no interpreter of it. Apparently, back then, this was something quite common because we've seen dreams before, haven't we? And Joseph said unto them, do not understanding, interpretation belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. Joseph hit the nail square on the head here, didn't he? If you're going to go and want someone to give you the meaning of your dreams, the best one to go to is God. Let him answer the question. And Joseph said, and gave God the glory right off. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said, and here it was his dream. He said, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were three branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossom shot forth, and the cluster thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them and into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup unto Pharaoh. And Joseph, he didn't have any trouble with this at all. He interpreted the dream right to the letter. Listen to what he said. He said unto him, this is the interpretation of it. The three branches are 3 days. And yet, within 3 days, Pharaoh is going to lift up thine head and restore thee into thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand after the former manner, or the way it used to be. You're going to go back to work for Pharaoh, and you're going to be his cupbearer again. That's, in essence, what Joseph told him was going to happen. Well, when he told this, as he's confronted with this, and he gives him, immediately almost, the baker, he seen it was a good pronouncement, and he turned to Joseph in verse 16. Look down there. It says, the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, and he said unto Joseph, I was also in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. The 3 stands out there just like it was with the cupbearer, but from here on it's going to change a little bit. And he said, I got 3 baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there was of all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. Now, we've got a problem, or Joseph has a problem that I'm sure that wasn't easy. You see, the interpretation of the dream, Joseph recognized right off. What did it mean? Joseph knew what it meant. The baker asked him, can you interpret this, or put in my own words? And the outcome of the baker's dream is going to be a little different. Matter of fact, it's going to be a big difference. And we have to admire Joseph right here, for he knew that the news was not good. That's an understatement. The news was bad. Have you ever been given bad news by somebody that was your friend? 3 years ago, I went to see Dr. Wong. Dr. Wong says, you got a problem, Don. I went home. Everything seemed okay with him, but about 3 or 4 days later it was, wasn't it, that he called me up and said he wanted me back in his office immediately. And I go back to see him, and Dr. Wong said, Don, I got bad news. You've got, right here on your esophagus, you've got cancer. It's come back malignant, and Don, it's not going to be good. I'm 85 years old at this time, and And Dr. Wong says, Don, I'm going to be honest with you. They're going to have to cut. It's going to require surgery, and they're going to have to take about that much of your esophagus and cut it out. And they're going to have to pick your stomach up and raise it up high. And he said, it's no small operation. We cannot do it here. You got to go to Cleveland. I go to Cleveland, and they made an appointment. Well, we tried getting Ohio State, and they wouldn't take our insurance, so we took off for Cleveland. And I get up there, and I walk in, and two doctors come in to see me right off, and they said, we got a problem. We go, your problem's your age. And we had already, he said, they had a team of 10 doctors in the background saying, we've looked at your records and things, and your age, you're too old to have surgery. But these two doctors, they talked to me and seen me, and they said, but you know what? You are not 85 years old. You couldn't be much of, now they knew better. They said you're probably in your 60s as far as your strength and everything is concerned. And he said, we need to talk about this. And so they go back, and they sent me home, and then I have to go back the second time to go back and see the doctors again. They get me in that upstairs room, and they do all kind of tests on me. They say, you think you could make 10 trips back to the other end of this building and back, walking? Well, I'd been walking at this time anywhere from 10 to 15 miles a day, just about every day. I've been riding a bicycle. I've been lifting weights. And I said, think I could walk it? I don't. You want me to run it? I said, I can run that distance. She said, no, we don't want you. She said, I want you to run it. Just do me 10 trips down at the end of the hall and back. And they take me in, put the for my heart blood pressure check and check in. And then they sent me out again. And I go back to see the doctor. He said, well, I think we better talk about this some more. And like I said, I had a team of 10 doctors talking over it. I say all of that to tell this. I had to go back and see one doctor. This doctor, he was a younger doctor, and he takes us in, and he sits down with us, and he said, I tell you this. They said, we cannot do surgery. Even with the energy and everything you've got, if we put you on the operating table, the report was, I die. He said, you'll not come off the operating table. You're going to die. You think that was easy for that doctor to tell me that? I had to drive home with that on my mind. He said, now I'll tell you what. He said, you've got a good doctor right down there in Portsmouth, Dr. Inoshito. And said, we're going to send you back to him. He said he would take you, and he's going to put you through chemo. And he said, I'll tell you right now. And I said, well, doctor, I don't feel 85. He said, you don't feel it now, but when you go through 8 weeks of chemo, you will feel your age. Well, he lied big time to me. I didn't feel 85 when I got through with that. I felt like I was 105. I thought I was going to die. Now, here's the thing. Look at me tonight. I could die tonight. I know that. I'm ready to go if God sees fit to call me right now. But let me say this. Did I want to hear that? No. But what if I would have ignored it? What if I would have said, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to take my chances and go on like I am. Probably wouldn't be here tonight. But by the way, we're going to live till God calls us home. We got a day, we got a time, we got an hour. We know that. But what I'm trying to say here is sometimes I'm sure the doctors did not want to tell me what they had to tell me. I'm sure that Dr. Wong, he's been my doctor for years, and I appreciate him. I love the man. And I'm sure he didn't want to tell me what he had to tell me. But wouldn't you rather somebody be honest with you and tell you the truth than tell you a lie and say everything's okay and you're okay, just go on? Joseph was not that kind of man. He had a message, and so he delivered the message. He gave him the interpretation. And he said something like this, my friend, and I believe he was his friend that time, your days are numbered. 3 days, your history. The king's going to take a rope, he's going to tie it around your, matter of fact, he says he's going to take your head off, and he's going to hang your body out there for the birds to eat the flesh off of your bones. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. Will this man be in heaven? Probably not. We don't know, though. If I got a report like that and I knew that the interpretation happened just exactly the way Joseph said it would, I would have sure been getting ready, wouldn't you? But we don't know what we know what the outcome was, but what happened. Now, Joseph is once more disappointed. I want you to go down to the last verse. Yes, yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but they got him. Now, I forgot something when it comes down through this. Joseph told the chief butler, he said, now when you get out, when you are released, and you go back to the king, and you're with the king, remember me. Don't you forget me. And guess what? The inevitable happened. The chief butler forgot. He got back. He was so excited. He's back in his old job. He's working with the king. You talk about disappointment. For 2 full years. That's what we're going to read as we go into chapter 41 for just a couple of verses. Follow me. And it came to pass. There's another one of those that come to pass. And it came to pass the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed. And behold, he stood by the river. Now, we're not going to talk about Pharaoh's dream tonight because we don't have time. But I want you to mark that for 2 full years. Think about it. I can just see Joseph getting up every morning thinking, waiting. They're going to come in here in just a little bit and tell me the king wants to see me, and I'm going to be out of this dungeon. I'm going to get out of here. But notice the emphasis here, 2 full years. 2 long, monotonous, miserable years, I believe, for Joseph. Now, what did Joseph think about when every day, about this time, he was thinking? The human tendency, I believe, would be, will I be here forever? I never deserved this to begin with. What have I done? I've done everything right. And look, the Lord, he might have been crying out to God. Lord, I did what you wanted me to do. I even told the butler the truth. I didn't do anything. I've served you faithfully, and what am I getting out of all of this? The story of Joseph's mistreatments, his disappointments, his abandonments resonates with all of us, does it not? I said this morning from the pulpit, and I'm going to make it clear tonight. If you don't see Jesus in just every page of the Bible, you're missing really what's there. Joseph was mistreated. Can you think of anybody that was mistreated more than Joseph was? Absolutely we can. His name is Jesus. Yes, Joseph was suffering. But I tell you right now, not even Joseph, with all he's been through, has suffered like our master has suffered. And I want you to see this. Wives without husbands tonight. She's not here, but I'm going to bring her name up anyway. Sister Justine. I miss her. When Scotty died, of all the people that I've ever known, I didn't think it would affect her like it did. She was so brave going through his death. When I would go there and he was dying, she was strong through it all. But when he was gone, she's felt abandoned. She feels alone. She's miserable. And she's told us that. Any of us has been there through that experience. I know that when I first came here, there sits a man right there that every time I seen Randy for almost a whole year, he was sitting and crying. His wife was gone. I could sympathize with him because my wife died right before his did. Some can take things a little bit better than others. I can't say that I rejoiced over my wife's going home, but I remember standing at the edge of the casket like this and people filing around, shaking my hand, and a preacher comes up, and I said to him, I wouldn't bring her back if I could. And he looked me right in the eye and he said, I don't want to bust your bubble, brother, but if what we preach is so, she wouldn't come back if she could. She's in a far, far better place. And I've been able to use that in a lot of funeral sermons. They're not the loser. We are, whether they're taken from us. But and I want to say this as kindly as I know how. Sometimes it's easier to give up a mate than have a mate leave you and take off, and you be left alone. I want to say it today, say it again. I've already been over this once, but here tonight in our world, there's children without parents. There's parents without children. And there's men and women without jobs. There's pastors without a ministry, sitting at home, miserable. There's former pastors' wives. The husband has died, and she's now alone, and she's no longer respected. I know situations like this. With Joseph, again, let me ask, why was he here? Untrue accusations. How many are there today who have been lied on, cheated on, and they hurt deeply? We've got some right around us. I don't want to point out anybody. Some of you have been there. You know what I'm talking about. We know that I've heard of women who, as I said, put their husband through college and seen their husbands walk off on them, and vice versa is the case. Now, what would your message be to Joseph right here? How would you talk to him? What would you tell him? And when we think of the people that are like him, that have been lied upon and cheated, what would you tell them? Or let me lay out another scenario. What about unfair abandonment? Joseph didn't abandon his brothers, but his brothers abandoned him. Now, I think what we can say to Joseph is turn your trials into trust. As you look to God to tenderly use that affliction that you're going through right now, that dungeon or that abandonment, for God's purpose. But I want to tell you something. You talk to somebody that's going through it right now, it's going to be hard for them to understand that. I'll ask a couple questions tonight and try to answer them for you. Have you ever been abandoned? Have you ever felt, anybody ever lied on you and cheated you? Can you name, I've already brought out Jesus, but was Jesus totally abandoned? Was Joseph totally abandoned? I've already pointed out, no, he wasn't. Because we've read twice there, the end of chapter 39, that God was with Joseph. Do you think that there's anybody outside of Jesus that has been treated or mistreated any worse than what Joseph was? There may have been somebody. But I want to tell you something. There's nobody that's ever been totally abandoned. Nobody, with the exception of one. Just one person. In all of humanity, from Adam to this time, on into whenever it's all over down here, there's only one person that's been totally abandoned until those that are unsaved are going to literally be hurled out into eternity, and they'll be abandoned from God. Can I give you a scenario, a case we find in the Bible? That one person, he's hanging on the cross. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. He's been there for 3 hours, almost. He looks down. His disciples are gone. They've all fled. He looks down off that cross, and there's his mother. And somehow John has made his way back. All the others have fled from him. Peter said, if the rest do, I won't. But he did. And only John. And Jesus looks down and he tells John, Mom's seen enough. Get her out of here. I want you to take her home with you, and I want you to be her son, and I want her to be your mother. In other words, he adopted each of them together. Now let me show you who abandoned Jesus. His disciples abandoned him. His brothers abandoned him. You say, you don't read that in the Bible. I don't have to. Where were they at? I'll tell you where they were at. They were hiding someplace. They didn't believe in Jesus. They didn't believe him to be the Son of God. They didn't believe him to be who he said he was. How do I know? Where were they at? Joseph is dead, no doubt. He's gone. But here is all of those that have gone from Jesus, and there's nobody standing on his side right now. And all of a sudden, the lights go out. It's noon, 12 o'clock noon, and Jesus is hanging there. It's 1 o'clock. It's 1:30, and Jesus is hanging there. Oh, there's some mumbling and grumbling out and around the crowd. But all of a sudden, out of the darkness, Jesus opens his mouth, and out comes the words, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Some of them are standing there saying he's crying for Elijah. I don't know how many times he said that. But Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. And then we're told the interpretation. The interpretation is, my God, why? Why? Why have you forsaken me? There's only one person in this whole entire universe at any time period that has been totally abandoned. Because I don't care where you're at, I don't care who has left you, I don't care what you're going through, you cannot say that you're totally abandoned. Open your Bible to Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 5, and I want to read it and show you why I can tell you that. In Hebrews chapter 13 in verse 5. I can quote it to you, but I want you to see it yourself. One verse. Verse 5. And it says this. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5. Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have. For he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. And I don't care, my friend, listen to me tonight. Whatever you're going through, you got one on your side. If the whole world, if mom and dad forsake you, if your children run off from you, if your wife leaves you, or your husband leaves you, or your best friend turns his or her back on you, listen to me tonight. Jesus said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I sang it the other morning. I repeat myself, but I think about it. Does Jesus care? When my heart is pained too deeply for mirth of song, and the burdens press, and the cares distress, and the way seem weary and long. I've been there, folks. I know what I'm talking about. And the songwriter says, oh, yes, he cares. I know he cares. His heart, whatever is burdening you and breaking your heart this night, I can promise you that Jesus' heart is broken with yours. He cares. And I know he cares. Archie, what page is that? Could you look it up for me real quick? And let's open our hymn books and let's sing a couple verses of that song before we leave here tonight. And I want to say to everyone here, we've taken a little extra time. But like I said this morning, there's not a chapter in this Bible. It's not about Jesus. And Joseph has just given us a wonderful illustration of how God is working in every one of our lives. We may not understand it. I know there's some of you tonight that are brokenhearted. You're burdened. I know that you're going through struggles right now. I wish I could help some of you with. I can tell you this, I can pray for you. And I mean that with all my heart. I do pray for you. I told them over yesterday at the prayer breakfast. And I'll tell you right now, Kyra being my witness, we pray every morning. We pray every night. We're trying to get everyone in this church. Why? Because I know the devil would like to destroy every family here. He'd like to destroy your family. He wants to break your heart. But Jesus cares. What page is it? 343? Huh? 373. 373. And I won't even have you stand, but let's sing. Let me point out the verses to